Welcome to another story of arrogance, greed, and revenge. But this one's on a whole different level. My name's Daniel, and I own a huge piece of land just outside of town. It's been in my family for generations, a stretch of rolling fields, wooded trails, and most importantly, a dammed-up river that created a private lake. That land was my pride, my retreat, and my inheritance. When my father passed, he told me, "Son, the land is worth more than money. Never let anyone take it from you." I didn't fully understand what he meant back then, but I sure learned the hard way. At first, life there was peaceful. I ran cattle, fished at the lake, and rented part of the land to local farmers. But peace doesn't last long when an HOA sets its eyes on your property. The trouble began when the city started expanding. Developers pushed out toward the countryside, carving up open fields into subdivisions. At first, it didn't bother me. They were miles away. But soon new roads cut closer and closer to my property. Then, one day, I got a letter in the mail. It was from an HOA I'd never even heard of. The letter claimed my land had been annexed into their jurisdiction due to a boundary redrawing. They included a neat little packet, rules about what I could and couldn't do, HOA fees, landscaping requirements, and even a warning about livestock restrictions. I almost laughed. My ranch had been here decades before their little cookie-cutter houses even existed. No way did they have authority over me. I tossed the packet straight into the trash. Big mistake. 2 weeks later, I drove home from town to find strangers surveying my fields. Trucks, clipboards, and hard hats. A full construction crew. I slammed the brakes and stormed over. "What do you think you're doing on my land?" I shouted. One of the men barely looked up. "HOA project. We've got permits. New residential. Development phase 3. I felt my blood boil. "This is my land. You don't have permission to be here," he smirked. "Talk to the board. We're just doing our job." That night, I marched into their so-called community office, a shiny little building at the entrance of the subdivision. Inside sat the board, 5 smug-looking people, led by the queen bee herself, Karen. She had that pinched face and fake smile you can spot a mile away. I slammed my fist on the table. "You're building on my land. That's trespassing." Karen tilted her head like I was a misbehaving child. "Actually, Mr. Daniels, according to recent zoning adjustments, your property falls under our HOA oversight. We've decided to develop a portion of it into residential homes. You'll be compensated, of course." "Compensated?" I nearly laughed. "You're stealing my land and you think a check makes it right?" Her smile didn't falter. "It's progress. You should be proud your land is being used for something that benefits the community. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have business to attend to." I walked out seething. And when I returned home, I found bulldozers already tearing up the fields, near my dam. Within months, they built houses, 35 of them, 35 homes on land my father had told me to protect. Families moved in, lawns were laid down, fences popped up, and the worst part? They acted like I was the intruder. Karen and her board strutted around, sending me letters about my non-compliant structures and failure to pay HOA dues. They thought they owned me. But here's what they didn't know. That lake on my property, it wasn't just for fishing. My grandfather had built the dam himself decades ago, a sturdy concrete wall that held back millions of gallons of water. And all those houses they built, every single one of them was downhill from that dam. They thought they could steal my land, but they had no idea the land could bite back. I started planning. For a while, I tried to live with it. I told myself, fine, they built their houses, maybe they'll leave me alone. But if you've ever dealt with an HOA, especially one run by a Karen, you know that's never how it goes. It started with letters. Dozens of them. Violation notice, non-standard fencing. Violation notice, livestock exceeding allowance. Violation notice, unapproved structures on property. They fined me hundreds, then thousands of dollars for things I'd been doing on that land for years. Grazing cattle, repairing my barn, even planting my own crops. Every time I ignored them, the fines doubled. They even threatened foreclosure. Foreclosure. On my land. Land that had been in my family since before their subdivision even existed. One day, Karen herself showed up. I was fixing a fence when her white SUV pulled up, and she stepped out in heels that sank into the dirt. She wrinkled her nose like the air was beneath her. "Mr. Daniels," she called, walking over with a clipboard. "You've ignored every notice we've sent. That's unacceptable." I leaned on the post driver. "Maybe because your notices mean nothing. You don't own me, and you don't own this land." She smirked. "That's where you're wrong. This community is expanding, and you're standing in the way of progress. If you don't cooperate, we'll be forced to escalate matters legally." I narrowed my eyes. "Is that a threat?" Her smile was cold. "Consider it advice. You might want to think about selling before things get ugly." I watched her drive off, gravel spitting under her tires. That was the moment I knew. There was no reasoning with her. She wasn't going to stop until she had it all. But what she didn't realize was that every move she made only fueled my determination. I started studying the dam. Every day after chores, I inspected the concrete wall, checked the sluice gates, and measured the water levels. The reservoir was fuller than it had been in years thanks to heavy rains. The pressure building behind that wall was immense. See, the thing about dams is they're built to last, but they're also built with controls. You open a gate, the water flows. You open all of them, you unleash a flood, and directly downhill from that dam sat 35 brand new houses, all built on land that used to be mine. My land. Of course, I wasn't stupid. I wasn't about to do something that would land me in prison. But here's the thing. The HOA had ignored multiple warnings from the county about improper drainage. They rushed development, cut corners, and built those houses without considering what could happen if the reservoir ever overflowed. All I had to do was let nature take its course. Meanwhile, the HOA kept escalating. They sent contractors onto my property to inspect violations. I caught them on my porch taking pictures. They even tried chaining up my cattle, claiming livestock were unauthorized. I called the sheriff, but they waved it off as a civil dispute. Nobody wanted to take on the HOA, so I started gathering evidence. I photographed their crews trespassing. I recorded every heated conversation with Karen, and I waited. The breaking point came at yet another board meeting. I showed up standing in the back while Karen droned on about community harmony. Then she announced something that made my jaw drop. "The board has voted to begin proceedings to acquire the remaining Daniels property through eminent domain," she said with a smug grin. "This land can be better used for further development. It's time we move beyond outdated uses of space." Eminent domain. They wanted to take my land. Neighbors clapped, not realizing what she was really saying, but I heard it loud and clear. If I didn't give up willingly, they'd find a way to steal it legally. That night, I stood by the dam under the moonlight, listening to the roar of the water against the gates. My father's words echoed in my mind. Never let anyone take the land from you. I placed my hand on the steel crank wheel of the sluice gate. With one twist, I could unleash the power of the river. It would sweep through their perfect little lawns, flood their picket fences, and remind them whose land this really was. I wasn't ready to pull the trigger that night, but the plan was forming. And the more they pushed, the closer I came to turning that wheel. Because if the HOA thought they could drown me in paperwork and fines, they hadn't seen what a real flood looked like. The day everything broke started out calm. Too calm, the kind of calm that tells you a storm's coming. I was fixing up my barn when I heard engines rumbling. I stepped out to see a line of trucks pulling up my drive. HOA board members, contractors, even a lawyer in a suit. And of course, Karen at the front strutting like she owned the place. She didn't even bother knocking. She just waved her clipboard like it was a royal decree. "Mr. Daniels," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "We've given you every opportunity to comply. This is our final notice. If you do not vacate the remaining land voluntarily, we will move forward with acquisition." I looked her dead in the eyes. "This land isn't for sale. It isn't for lease. And it sure as hell isn't yours to take," she smirked. "We'll see about that." Then she turned to her crew. "Survey it. Start marking the expansion lines. We'll push this through the courts if we have to. I clenched my fists. They weren't just threatening anymore. They were acting like it was already theirs. That was it. That was the last straw. I didn't argue. I didn't fight. I just walked away, calm as a man could be, and headed toward the dam. The sky was already heavy with rain clouds. The past week had been nothing but storms filling the reservoir, higher than I'd ever seen it. The water churned behind the wall, straining against the gates, begging to be released. I stood there for a moment, staring at the wheel, my father's words echoing in my head again. Never let anyone take it from you. With a deep breath, I gripped the crank and turned, slowly at first, then harder. The gate groaned, the metal shuddering as it creaked open. And then, the roar. A surge of water exploded through the opening, white foam crashing down the spillway like thunder. The ground trembled. The sound echoed through the valley. And downhill, right in the path of that unleashed torrent, sat 35 freshly built houses. At first, it was just a stream, rushing into their manicured lawns. I could almost imagine Karen sipping coffee, frowning at a puddle forming in her driveway. But then the full force hit. The water ripped through the subdivision like a beast unleashed. Lawns turned into rivers, fences snapped like twigs, and driveways vanished under a torrent of mud and foam. Cars floated, garbage cans bobbed down the street, and families ran outside shouting in panic, and right in the middle of it all stood Karen, her perfect little white SUV halfway submerged, screaming into her phone. I watched from the hill as chaos unfolded. Neighbors scrambled, shouting at each other, dragging furniture out of flooding houses. Sirens wailed in the distance. The development that had stolen my land was being swallowed by the very land it stood on. By the time emergency crews arrived, it was too late. The floodwaters had torn through foundations, ruined basements, and left the whole subdivision looking like a war zone. Of course, they tried to blame me. Karen screamed at the cops, pointing up toward my dam like I'd personally declared war. But here's the thing. I hadn't done anything illegal. The dam was inspected and certified. The water levels were high from rain. All I had done was relieve the pressure. If I hadn't, the entire dam might have burst and wiped out the whole valley. At least that's what the report said later. The HOA tried suing me. They brought in lawyers, inspectors, even experts to claim I'd caused the flood deliberately. But my lawyers flipped it right back on them. Your developments ignored drainage requirements. Your houses were built on flood-prone land. My client merely maintained his dam to prevent a catastrophic failure. In the end, the county agreed. The HOA had overstepped. They hadn't just stolen my land. They'd built recklessly, cutting corners, ignoring warnings. The flood wasn't my fault. It was theirs. Karen's little empire crumbled overnight. Insurance wouldn't cover most of the damage. Homeowners turned against her. And within months, the HOA dissolved under lawsuits and debt. As for me, I kept my land, every acre of it. The houses that survived were abandoned, left as shells of Karen's arrogance. Nature reclaimed them fast, vines climbing the walls, weeds pushing through cracked driveways. Now, when I walk the ridge above the dam, I look down at that ruined subdivision. I see the broken fences, the empty driveways, the ghost town that used to be a thriving HOA. And I smile, because they thought they could drown me in paperwork. They thought they could steal what was mine. But in the end, the land fought back. In the weeks after the flood, my land looked like two different worlds. On one side, my fields were still green, the barn stood strong, and the cattle grazed like nothing had happened. On the other side, the subdivision, it was devastation. Mud-caked sidewalks, warped fences, hollow shells of houses gutted by water damage. At night, it was eerily silent. No porch lights, no barking dogs, no sound of kids riding bikes. Just the wind, crickets, and the steady hum of the dam still standing. Tall, I wish I could say I felt guilty, but I didn't. Because every time I walked past the ruins of that subdivision, I remembered the smug smiles, the endless fines, the letters threatening foreclosure. I remembered Karen standing on my porch telling me I was in the way of progress. I remembered her calling in survey crews, sending trespassers onto my land, acting like my family's heritage meant nothing compared to her HOA's expansion. They weren't victims. They were thieves who built their castles on sand. And the river washed it all away. Of course, Karen didn't go quietly. She filed lawsuits, dozens of them. Claimed negligence, claimed harassment, even claimed I had sabotaged her community. But every court date ended the same way, with her humiliated. My lawyers pulled out county records, inspection reports, floodplain maps, everything that proved what we all knew. Those houses were doomed the second they broke ground, and she was the one who pushed the project through despite warnings. Judges dismissed case after case, and slowly the homeowners turned on her. At one hearing, I saw one of her old board members yelling at her in the parking lot. "You ruined us, Karen! You said this land was safe!" Another time, a family who'd lost everything showed up with signs, protesting outside the courthouse. Her precious image as the queen of the neighborhood had crumbled into dust. Eventually, she disappeared. Rumor had it she sold what was left of her house and moved 3 states away. I don't know, and honestly, I don't care. The HOA? Bankrupt, gone, never to return. And me? I still have my land. The dam is stronger than ever. I reinforced it, upgraded the gates, and made sure it'll stand for another 100 years. My cattle still graze, my fields still bloom, and my lake is fuller than it's ever been. But sometimes, when the water level rises after a storm, I walk up to the wheel and put my hand on it. Just to remind myself, power doesn't always come from money or titles or a clipboard full of violations. Sometimes power comes from simply standing your ground. Neighbors drive by sometimes looking at the ruined subdivision, and they always ask the same thing. "Daniels, how'd you manage?" To beat them, I just smile and say, "They thought they could drown me in fines, but I showed them what a real flood looks like." YouTube-style outro, and that's the story, folks. The HOA thought they could bully one man off his own land. They built 35 homes on property they didn't own, fined me, threatened me, even tried to take me to court. But in the end, they learned the hard way that greed, arrogance, and entitlement don't stand a chance against determination, and a dam full of water. So the next time someone underestimates you, remember this. You don't always have to fight with their rules. Sometimes you let nature and karma do the heavy lifting. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, smash that like button, subscribe for more insane HOA tales, and drop a comment telling me what you would have done if you were in my shoes. Because when it comes to HOAs, revenge stories like this are just getting started.